come on in. Hello, Dan. Good to see you. Staying caffeinated? Yeah, that's good. I was just telling people I'm jet lagged and I'm attempting live coding this late in the day, so I'm hoping that everyone else is awake and will help me get through it. Hey, you came. All right. We still got some people coming in, but I think we should get started. Hello, welcome. A lot of friendly faces that I've seen at the booth. Welcome, welcome. Good. So let's get started. My name is Marcus, and I will be your host today. We are going to go on a little fun live coding adventure, so I hope you are excited and ready to go. We only have a couple more sessions today, and after that, we'll get to enjoy beautiful Barcelona on a Friday afternoon, so what could be better than that? Today we're going to talk about full stack development in the Java world. Specifically, we're going to talk about full stack development where we're connecting React on the front end with Spring Boot in the backend into one project and how that can look like. So again, my name is Marcus. I work at a company called Vaadin. We have a booth down there, so if you have questions after this, we have plenty of time to go through those. Like it says here, I'm a simple man. I like simple things. And if you've been on the internet lately, I've noticed there's like a little bit of a trend going on where after last couple of years of push for very elaborate setups when it comes to architectures and team setups and services and microservices and tiny services and even smaller services, we're starting to see a little bit of backlash where people are like, well, could things be simpler? Like, do we need to have everything complex by default? And what I'm here to say is that I think whenever you have the possibility, I know it's not always possible, but if you are able to build software as one team, as a full stack team, that can be really powerful. You can build software of higher quality faster. Why that is if you as a team have ownership over the project, it gives you a whole lot of autonomy that you might not otherwise have. So you have improved communication, which leads to better quality. I remember talking to one of our customers who was in the medical space, and he was like, not having to explain this complex domain of the medical world to a separate developer on a different team to get that somehow translated into a UI saved him like just weeks in 1 week. So there's a lot of stuff that goes away. Likewise with waiting, so instead of asking a different team for something you need, you can ask somebody on your own team and you can schedule that within your own kind of backlog instead of first waiting it to kind of get to the top of somebody else's backlog and then getting them out. So that's something that's pretty cool. So if we're specifically at Vaadin trying to optimize this experience for full stack teams, that means that we're kind of optimizing our stack for productivity over control. So I'm not saying that what we're going to look at today will be the way that you want to build all of your software or that it will be good for everything that you want to do. What I'm saying is that if what you see here today seems like it could be a good fit for what you're trying to accomplish, this is a very productive way of going about building software. So in order to be more productive, you need to be more opinionated because we're taking some kind of choices for you. We're making some choices. We're saying like, these are good ways of doing things in our opinion. We've done this for 20 plus years and we've seen this work for a lot of people. So if you agree with these sets of kind of optimizations that we've made, you're going to have a really productive way of building applications. So today we're going to talk about our new open source framework called Hilla. And Hilla is essentially, think Next.js for Spring Boot. So we're building a React application that's kind of tightly bound to a Spring Boot backend with seamless communication back and forth, and that can look a little bit magic. So I think the best way of showing that will be in live code. Before we get there, let's go through the basics real quick. So Hilla builds on the same set of UI components that Vaadin Flow, our flagship product, does. So we have a big set of these UI components that give you the building blocks you need when you're building an application. So instead of us first building the building blocks and then using the building blocks to build the app, we start with the building blocks. Specifically, we tend to work with a lot of people building more complex data-heavy applications. So we have a lot of controls for things like data grids and charts and things like that, where you can build some pretty impressive looking applications very quickly. We spend a lot of time making sure that these components are accessible to folks using screen readers or other assistive devices. Obviously, it's a very nice thing to do, but if you know we're in the EU and they have quite strict regulation as well. So starting off with components that already adhere to those standards can really give you a leg up in trying to build an application that gives a good experience to everyone using the application. We've made sure that these components are very customizable, so you can make them look and feel the way you want for your application specifically. All of these components are available as React components, so if you've ever used React, you already pretty much know how these components work. And we're going to take a look at this very closely in live code. We also ship with file-based routing, so very similar to Next.js, you just put files in the front-end views directory, and depending on their name, they're going to get mapped to routes in your application. So you don't need to maintain separate routing, and there are some additional benefits that we're able to optimize because the backend knows what front-end routes there are, so we can do things like security in interesting ways. The other thing that's going to look very different from what you've seen before is how we interact with the backend. So instead of doing more generic REST APIs where the intent is that pretty much anyone can call these APIs, we're building one full stack application, and as such we're doing RPC calls, so we're doing method calls within one application. The way we do this is by taking a Java class, we put a browser callable annotation on it, indicating that we would like to call this class from the browser, and that will mean that any public methods there will be callable from the browser. In this case, I put an anonymous allowed as well, because that will allow anyone to call them by default. Everything is kind of secured. So once we've done that, we can go to our TypeScript code. We can call a method with the exact same signature, and we get a response that's typed exactly the same as it is in Java. So if we change the signature of the method or the return types or anything, that's going to give us a compile time error in the React code. So we have this kind of safety net of type safety going all the way from our backend all the way to the UI. All right, so I think that's enough of the backend theory. Like, we're not here to listen to a lecture, really. We want to build stuff. So we're going to go to Josh's, is it second, third, fourth? I'm kidding. Second most favorite place on the earth. So Start Spring IO. Has anyone here not been to Start Spring IO? Okay, good. Everyone's at the right conference. That's perfect. So I've added a few dependencies to my app here. We're going to use Java, obviously. Maven, I prefer Maven. Spring Boot, of course. And we're going to add Vaadin as a dependency. DevTools, we integrate really well with that, so when you make a change, it's going to auto-reload the browser for you. We're going to build a backend, so I'm just adding Spring Data JPA and an H2 database, so we have something real quick that we can persist to. And it's 2024, so obviously there needs to be an AI component here, so we're going to add Spring AI and play around with that as well, because it's going to be a good way for us to see how we can deal with streaming responses. So we're going to go ahead and download this. We're going to unzip it. We're going to open it in our IntelliJ IDE. So that'll be Hilla like this. Of course, you can use any IDE you prefer. So if there are any NetBeans users here, you can also use Vaadin if you want. All right, so if we look at what we have here in the POM file, very basic stuff. The only problem is that our release was not out in time. Who knows? So I have a file here called thefuture.txt, and we're going to go ahead and paste that in here. And what that will do is it will define our pre-release repositories, which will allow me to use 24.4 beta 5 like this. So the stuff that we're looking at is coming out in our 24.4 release. And if you try this without doing that, you're going to have a bad time, and not all of this will work. All right, so we added that, and we now have everything that we need. I'm going to ask somebody in the back there to give me a thumbs up or down if you can see the text here, or I should bump it up a little bit. Boo. Okay, that's good. Good to check at this point. So we're going to do 150%. Yes, excellent. All right, very good. So one thing we need to do, since we added that Spring AI dependency, is we need to give it an open AI key. Otherwise, it's going to be angry at us, and it's not going to allow us to even start the application. So I'm going to do spring.ai API key. I have it in a environment variable, so I'm going to add it there. And then we're going to use the new GPT 4.0 model that was released last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. Anyway, it's a pretty decent and fast model that we can use. And the other thing that we're going to do, if we look at our source folder here, we have the source main Java folder. We got the Spring Boot application here. So what we want to add then is this front end folder. So I'm going to create a new file in the front end views directory. And we have this special name for an index file. So start with an @ index.tsx, tsx meaning a TypeScript React file. I'm going to export a default function. So every React component is a function. We can call this our index, sure. I'm going to actually call this my contact view. And then we're going to return a template like this. So if we start this right now, it's going to start up. And the first time we start it, it's going to take a while because it's going to fetch all our front-end dependencies, back-end dependencies. It's going to build the app and start a Vite development server. So once that's starting up, we can go to localhost 8080. While it's building, it's going to show us this little indicator that something is happening. And this will take, depending on how fast the conference Wi-Fi is, might take anywhere from, I don't know, 15 seconds to 2 minutes. It's been very different every time I've tried it. All right, so we have now our H1 is showing here. All the components we have adhere to a common theme that we call Lumo, and I'm going to import that here. So I'm going to create a new style sheet here and just include all the stuff that we want. So I'll do a separate styles directory here and call this my styles.css. And I'm going to import some ready-made CSS here because we don't want to write all that CSS ourselves. So we're going to import from a URL, and that URL will be at Vaadin React Components, CSS, and lumo.css like this. And then we're going to take in some utility CSS. So if you've ever used something like Tailwind, you know there are these CSS utility classes, and they can make it pretty quick to build some basic structures without really having to write all that CSS yourself. So utilities, and then finally typography. And that's all the setup we want to do here. So we're just going to import the CSS into our React component here, and that's going to be from our styles directory like that. And let's see, no, not index, styles.css. Okay, so I'm going to try to somehow fit both of these next to each other so we can see what's happening. So I'm going to add one of those utility classes here, just a medium padding, so everything's kind of nice and organized here. And the first thing I want to do then is I want to define our backend model. So we're going to create our simple like address book type of application where we have contacts. And the first thing we need to do, of course, is define a model that we can work with and kind of persist to a database. So I'm going to create a Java class called contact, and we're put this in a separate data package, and we're going to turn this into just a normal JPA entity. It needs to have a private long ID maybe, and we're going to annotate this with an ID. And by no means do you need to use JPA. If you prefer to use something else to persist, you can definitely do that as well. So we're just going to have a very simple one that has maybe name, email, phone. We need to have an empty constructor for JPA. We need to have one that takes in all of them. Then we'll do some getters and setters and call it a day. So then the next thing that we need to do is have a repository. So we're going to create an interface called contact repository, like that. And we're going to extend from the JPA repository for contact and long. And we're going to also, in addition to that, we're going to do the JPA specification executor. And we're going to get back to that, why I'm doing that in just a moment. So we have this repository. We can do CRUD operations on our database. And then, of course, we need some test data to play around with. So I'm going to create a class called db init like this. We're going to turn this into a Spring component. We're going to implement a app runner like this. And we're going to create the method for running. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to inject this contact repository into my constructor so that Spring gives us an implementation of the contact repository, and then we're going to generate some test data. As you probably noticed, I'm using Copilot here to make things go smoother. And one of the things I really like about Copilot is generating test data, because it's super annoying to just have user 1, 2, 3 and stuff. So I've noticed that it works really better if you give it some kind of guidance on what you want it to do. So let's say generate 21st and last names, then use them to create and save 100 contacts. Let's see what we get. And so we get some first names, we get some last names, and we get some data. So hopefully, if all went well, we now have 100 people in our database who look and feel sort of realistic. Okay, so we've taken care of our persistence layer. The next thing we want to do is then create a service layer that we can call from our UI and actually interact with these. So we're going to create a new Java class. I'm going to create this in a service package. I'm going to call this my contact service, like that. And here I'm going to use that browser callable API. So this is something we want to call from the browser. We're going to do anonymous allowed because I'm not doing a talk on Spring security. That's a whole different topic in and of itself. Again, we're going to do a private final contact repository. So here I'm just like calling the repository directly. That's fine for a small app like this. In a real app, you might have a couple layers in between. So I'm going to expose 2 APIs. One is for just fetching all the contacts and one for saving. So that'll just give us a basic kind of CRUD. So we'll have one that returns a list of contact objects. Contact, let's see there. There we go. And this will just be called findAll. Then we'll have another method that returns a contact. And we'll call this our save method, like that. Okay, so I'm going to save and build. That's going to let Spring Boot DevTools pick up on the change and generate a TypeScript accessor for this. So if we go into our index file right now, we should be able to call our backend from TypeScript. So if you haven't used React before, it essentially consists, like every component consists of 2 things. A state, which has the state of the component, and then a template, which gets re-rendered whenever that state changes. So I'm going to define a state that contains all of those contacts that we have. That looks something like this in React. So we'll have our contacts, and we're going to use state. We are using TypeScript, so we can say that these will be of type contact array. And you can see that this is getting imported from a generated folder. So we didn't have to specify that this contact has these types. That gets automatically generated. If we change what a contact looks like, that's going to get automatically reflected in our UI. The other thing with React components is that they're functional. So if we want to introduce a side effect to our otherwise perfectly functional component, we need to use an effect to define a side effect to our component. So a side effect would be calling the server and changing the state somehow. So this is where things will start to look very different. So you can see Copilot is trying to tell me to do an API call to fetch contacts, but I'm going to call contact service dot find all, then set contacts. So we're calling it as a method. You can see it's angry at me right now. It's saying that the types don't match, and this is because there's a fundamental kind of mismatch between Java and TypeScript and how nullability works. Java is like anything can be null, sure, why not? And TypeScript's like nothing, literally nothing can be null unless you specifically say it can be. So I'm a responsible API designer. I don't like to return null values, whether that's like a null list or a null element within a list. So I'm going to annotate this with a non-null API. That's going to let our TypeScript compiler know that this guy knows what he's doing, and it's going to generate a lot simpler types for us, and that will then hopefully work. So let's make sure that we actually got all of those contacts here. So we'll map over them, and we could use autocomplete now to see what are the different properties we have here. So let's just quickly show all the emails that we have here, and sure enough, we're able to fetch all of the emails. But again, this is not super exciting. I said we have all these cool components that we can use and make things a lot easier for us, so we're going to do that. So we're going to use a grid component, and a grid is for showing tabular data, and it's going to have some columns. So we're going to define the columns like this. We're going to say that the path is to name, like that, and then we're going to let Copilot create these, and the only thing we need to do is tell it where it can find the items. So in our case, the contacts array. And when that reloads, we have a data grid that looks a whole lot nicer than our unordered list, showing all of these people. So what I want to do next is kind of build a simple CRUD where we can select a person here, we'll show a form, then we can update that and save it back to the server. So we need to do a little bit of work here, and I'm hoping this is something we can kind of sort out in the future, the framework, but we're going to keep track of the selected person in a piece of state. So we're going to have the selected contact like this, and the contact can be either set or it will be null. And then we go into our grid, and we first of all add a listener for whenever the user makes a selection. So when the active item changes, we set the selected user to that, and then we set the selected items to that person. So if we now go in here, you can see that the selection shows, and if we go in here and maybe take the selected to dot, let's do email, we should be able to see that the email of that person gets displayed as we're changing things here. So what I want to do then is build a quick React form where we can just edit the selected person and save it back to our backend. So for that, I'm going to go back to my frontend folder. I'm going to create a new file. We'll put this in a separate components folder, and it's going to be called my contact editor. Again, TSX file, because we're doing TypeScript, and we're going to export a default function called contact editor, like that. Here I'm going to define an interface, so I'm going to say like what am I expecting as properties. So we're going to do an interface, and this is where you can see that Java and React start to differ quite a bit on how they work. So there will be a couple of things that we want to have. So first of all, we're saying that we want to have a contact passed into us, and this is again the same generated type. And then I'm going to say that I want you to pass in a function that should handle whenever we save it. So I'm going to call this my onSubmit, and this will be a function that gets a contact and doesn't return void, but actually a empty promise. How nice. All right, so again, we will return the template, so whatever should be shown here. So right now we just have a H1 here. But what I want to do is show how we can handle forms in Hilla, so how we can use the information we have from Java to build a form that's pretty nice. So we have this concept of a form, so we can use that to bind UI fields to that model that we have, and that model is aware of constraints that we put on that model in Java. So let's see how that looks. So we're going to destructure something here. So I'm going to type this out and then explain what's happening. So I'm going to take out field, model, submit, and read from calling a function called useForm. useForm takes in our contact model. So this is a description of that contact Java object that we have. And then the other thing that it will take in is an options object, and I'm going to pass in my onSubmit method like this. Okay, yeah. So I forgot to actually construct. So the way we define the API is we take in as parameters a contact editor props. So this is the interface we expect to get in, and then we can pass that in here. So on submit. So what this does is when we call useForm, it returns an object with all kinds of helpful things to us, but it returns like 20 things, and we only need a few of them. So we're going to pull out field, which is something that we can use to bind a UI field to a model. The model is something that describes what we're binding to and what the value is, and then submit and read our methods that we can use. So I'm going to change this to have a text field, which will have a label of name, and it's going to be bound to the model's name property. We'll have likewise an email, we're going to have a phone, and then we're going to have a button that calls that submit like this. Then, as you recall, we have this contact that we're expecting to get passed into us, And what we can do is we can define an effect in React. So we're going to do use effect. And we're going to say that whenever the contact changes, we want to read in that contact value. So this way we're essentially having the same instance of the component, but anytime a new contact is passed in, it's going to reread that into the fields. And because we're using this field here, it's going to get automatically passed into all of those fields. All right, so that was a lot of typing, and I hope I did it right, because otherwise this is not going to work. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to do a little check here. So if we have a selected person, we're going to display the form. If not, we're not going to display it. So we're going to show the contact editor, and now you can see that IntelliJ understands that since we define those properties, it's going to expect us to pass in a contact. We know that that's going to be our selected contact. And the other thing that it expects to get back is this onSubmit method. So for that, I'm going to create a new method here, an async method called, sure, onSubmit sounds very good. And we're going to call our backend and expect that we get a updated contact back. So we call this save method that we have in our contact service right here, and it returns a contact, and we save that in a constant. Then we do a little bit of array magic. So essentially we set the contacts to a new array where we swap out that updated contact. So this way we're updating the UI state right away when somebody saves that. So we can pass in our submit method here, and if things go well, we should be able to start clicking around here, and because we're passing in the selected person, that gets shown there. Of course, this doesn't look very nice, so let's go ahead and make that a little bit nicer. So in here, again, I'm going to add a class name here. So I'm going to turn this into a grid, so just a CSS grid with grid columns 2, and maybe a small gap between all of them. And then we can say the item should be baseline, makes them look a little bit nicer, maybe theme equals primary, like that. All right, so that looks like a pretty decent thing. So let's go ahead and see if we can actually change this. So if we now say, instead of Peter Miller, we have Marcus Miller, I can save that. You can see that it's actually getting updated in here. And if I refresh that, we can kind of see that it was actually persisted all the way to the database. Now I said that we have these kind of validations that we can add. So if I were to have say a size validation saying there that the email needs to be an email, and maybe, well, let's not deal with the phone numbers here, but let's just have some like very basic constraints on what you can actually have and what you can't have. So once that gets reloaded, we'll see, well, it's really hard to see here, but there's a little dot showing a kind of required indicator. So now I can't have an empty. If I try with an invalid email, it's not going to let me do that. So it kind of passes a lot of stuff along like that. All right, so I wanted to just show you how kind of all the nuts and bolts work, but obviously since we are a full stack framework, we can optimize a lot more. We can do a lot more work for you if you are lazy and you don't feel like doing a lot of typing. So let's go ahead and remove all of this and instead extend from our CRUD repository service. We're going to say that we have a service that has contacts. Their ID is of type long, and our repository is the contact repository, like that. Then we go to our file and we remove, let's say we're going to remove that, and then we're going to remove this. We're going to return a AutoCRUD that's bound to our contact service, like that, and it's going to display people with the contact model. And if we now build this, we should be getting a full-blown CRUD view with essentially, I don't know, 3 lines of code. It's pretty nice. It has more features than we had. It has delete and new and all kinds of stuff. Let's add a class name of hfull. That makes it look a little bit nicer. So pretty decent. Good. Next thing I want to do is let's play around with Spring AI just so we can see how we can deal with streaming responses, because that's something that can be quite useful. So again, we're going to create a new component. So we're going to go here. We're going to call this our AI chat, maybe, TSX. And we're going to again create a new React component, and we're going to export a default function like this. Let's return something like that, and just make sure we can go to it. So since our file name is AI chat, we should be able to go to AI chat like this and see that. Yep, so that works. I'm just gonna give it a medium padding like that. And we're not gonna do anything too crazy here. So let's just have an input, a button, and then just show whatever response we get from there. So to have something to call, of course, we need to go in and build a service. So I'm gonna create a class here. We're gonna call this our AI service. And this is gonna be, again, a browser callable service because we wanna call it from the browser. It should be anonymous allowed because we wanna call it without having to deal with Spring Security. What we need to do then is inject or kind of create the Spring AI chat client. You've probably all of you have seen it since you've been 2 days at Spring I/O already, so I'm not going to explain too much of what's going on there, but we're going to, again, create a private final chat client. Let's see, chat client like this, and we're going to inject this. They actually changed this API just like on Monday, Tuesday maybe, when I was flying here, so it works a little bit different. So you now want to have, you get a builder and you use that builder to build it. And we're just going to have a simple public string, let's see, get completion, and we have some sort of prompt. The API for this looks something like this. So you have your chat client, you prompt it with, or you prompt it like this, then you add a user message. So this message is from the user, then we call the model, so we make the request to OpenAI, and then we get the content from there. So by having this method now, we're going to OpenAI, we're getting the response, and we're returning it to our browser. Our OpenAI key and everything stays securely on the server. We're not doing that from the browser, but we're passing it through the server. So if we then go ahead and do a little form, so we'll just have a text field and an input. So we'll have a text field here for, let's see, placeholder, ask me anything. And yeah, actually let's do this. So again, we in React we have this like state and template. So I'm going to define a state for the actual prompt. So const prompt and set prompt. So we're going to have a state for that, and then we're going to, hopefully this will understand what we're trying to do when we say that we want to have the value of the text field always be bound to the prompt. And when we do a change, oh god, typing is terrible. So whenever the value changes, we set the prompt to that new value. So this is a traditional like React bound component. We could have used the form here as well, but I just wanted to show you that we are doing just regular React stuff here. And then the button should be doing send. So we're defining a new async function here. So let's do function send. And what we're going to do then, again, we need some sort of state to put that answer into. So we're going to create a const for the response. Again, that's going to be of type string. And this response we can get by calling await, and then we're going to call our AI service. And let's go ahead and I didn't actually need to build the project for that TypeScript to get generated. So we should be able to hopefully find it here. Come on. Yes. So we have our AI service. We are going to get the completion with that prompt and set it as a response. And of course, we need to then display that somewhere. So let's do just a paragraph here and have the response output there. So if we say, hey, hit send, of course, we need to hook up the button's click listener so it actually calls send. That would help tremendously. All right, so let's try that again. you can now see that we're getting a response from the AI. The problem here is that if we wanted to have something more elaborate, like give me some tips for dinner in Barcelona, now we're going to get this like endlessly kind of hanging progress bar here, because it's generating a lot of text for us, and we're just waiting for that entire block of text to get generated before we push it here. And that's not super nice user experience, so we're going to go ahead and change that. So all we need to do is where it says call, we say stream. Then when it gets really angry at us, we change the return type to a flux. We build a project, and again, our TypeScript will very shortly let us know that we're doing bad things, like this part here broke now. We changed our backend API, so we need to change that. So we're, instead of calling get completion, we're gonna subscribe to the next token. So whenever the next token comes along, we're gonna set the response to our response plus whatever that token is. So the AI model kind of produces text in tokens, which are these subwords. So we're just listening for each one of them. We're appending them to that state. React will take care of really kind of efficiently updating that in the DOM. So if we now ask it to give me some dinner tips in Barcelona, this should hopefully give us a much nicer experience where it's actually like outputting this as we're going. Now, of course, this is still not looking super great because it's giving us markdown and we're not in there. So let's do that real quick. So npm I react markdown. So this, again, just a normal React project, so we can use anything in the entire React ecosystem. So instead of having a P here, we're going to have a markdown component. And, well, so give me some dinner tips in Barcelona. Good. So now we're getting somewhere. So it's looking pretty decent, like for the amount of time we spent on doing this. We're getting some stuff. We have 10 minutes left. How are you on time? All right. So I will do just one real quick thing here just to show you, kind of wrap everything up. So I'm going to create a common layout for these two and just generate a little nav bar. For that, we have a special name again, layout.tsx, tsx like this, and export default function layout like this. And we're going to return a new layout. So I'll have a div wrapping everything, then I'll have a nav for our navigation, then I'll have a main section for our content. So I'll do a outlet. So this is a React router outlet. We're saying like, here's where the view goes. And here for the nav, we're gonna use a Hilla built-in feature. So we're gonna call create menu items. So create menu items, we'll look at what are the register routes, and then we're gonna map those. And for each menu item, we can then output a React component. So I'm going to do a nav link to item.to, and the text should be item.title, like this. We save that. We now have navigation here. We can maybe make that look a little bit nicer. So class name, flex, gap small, padding medium. And I think that's good enough for what we want to do here. So we managed to build a fairly nice application. We have a CRUD view, we have streaming, AI, all of that good stuff. What I didn't show you here, we didn't have time, but you can put a config object on your React view, and you can define things like which roles should be allowed to view this view, and it will actually configure also your Spring security if you have that set up. So it knows, because the server knows what front-end routes you have, you can have kind of shared security configuration for them. You can also configure things like what should the menu title be, an icon, and things like that. So in summary, Hilla is really a kind of React experience that's optimized for a Java backend. So it helps full-stack developing teams build apps faster, by using all of these features that we just looked at. It is an open source Apache licensed project, so everything that we were just playing around with is completely open source. You can do whatever you want with it. We just did a live stream with Alina on how you can compile this to a native application. I've had a Hilla native application running on Fly.io for almost a year. It's never consumed more than 102 megabytes of RAM, I think, so quite optimal. If you want to learn more, you can go to our website, or even better, come down to our booth and grab a t-shirt while you're asking us those questions. So we have about 9 minutes for questions, and if you have a question, we have a microphone that's going around here somewhere, and if you ask good questions, you can get one of these exclusive Vaadin reindeer stickers. They're very cool, so I implore you to ask good questions. And yeah, so let's do a couple of questions here.
Hello. Hi. Thanks for the talk, firstly. It looks really nice to use, let's say, in one file that has one service, or like one, let's say, thing.
Yeah.
What we use mostly, at least for me, we're using a lot of microservices, and in my back office I call almost 20 different different places. And if I want to, how to say, pull all of the files and the classes and other generated things, how does that stuff work? Is it easy or
yeah, so this is, you can think of Hilla as a kind of backend for front-end pattern library. So you could delegate, like in that service, to any number of microservices. So anything you can connect to from Spring Boot, which is pretty much anything and everything, you can call from there. And that way you just have that one entry point kind of to your backend, and then you can kind of handle everything else within there. So if you then return any types from there, they're obviously going to get generated to TypeScript then, and you get all the benefits here. Yeah.
I had a question about the @browser callable annotation.
Yeah.
So I imagine if you opened up the network tab, there's some kind of path going from the front end to the back end.
Yeah.
So is that annotation basically writing a controller underneath the hood for us without having to write the controller?
Yeah, so it creates a controller and then a TypeScript method that calls the controller and applies those generated TypeScript types on it. So at the end of the day, there's very little magic going on, but it's more of a convenience thing, and just a lot of our customers are building apps where they're building it for like 2-3 years and then they're maintaining it for a long time, and like the person who wrote it's not going to be the person maintaining it. So if there's something that gets you a red squiggly line and yells at you when you do something stupid, it just helps things to stay in one working condition. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you for a cool presentation. I've got a question. Like a lot of talks were related on this conference to native stuff. So would I be able to build all that stuff and package into a native image?
Yes. I actually recorded a live stream with Alina Yurenko from the GraalVM team at 1:30. So it's almost 2 hours old already at this point, but everything should still be current. So if you check out my Twitter here, it'll be like the latest message you find there is a live stream. It's a very short one, but basically you don't need to do anything special. You just you do a Maven build with the native profile, and then for Vaadin you need to call production profile as well. So we remove some of the build time niceties like live reload and stuff that you don't want to have in your production native application, but everything should work out of the box. If it doesn't, that's a bug and you can report it.
Would it work with Gradle?
It does work with Gradle as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for the enthusiasm.
Does it support the Chrome dev tool extension? So can I debug for the front end from the browser with the regular dev tool by React?
Yeah, so you can just use the regular React dev tools or like even Chrome dev tools. There's nothing really super special happening here. So if we inspect what's going on, The one thing you will notice is that each Vaadin component is a custom HTML tag, so Vaadin button would correspond to a Vaadin button, and a Vaadin grid corresponds to a Vaadin grid, and so on. So the components we have are built as web components, which allows us to reuse them in different frameworks without having to rewrite them. So you can explore this and kind of easily
So
debug.
basically, every state I can, as usual with the dev tool, just inspect it from there. So I just put extension, and then I can see the whole state of the page.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for the talk. I was, when you opened your front-end project,
Yeah.
I didn't see a package JSON or anything like this, and I was wondering if there is a possibility to finer grained customization.
Yeah, there
sorry,
is,
I did not see it.
So obviously Spring Boot doesn't ship with a package
All right.
JSON, so it was like when we started the app, since we didn't have one, Hilla created one with whatever it needed, and then as we did that NPMI for React Markdown, it just added it to the existing package JSON. So if you had one from before, then Hilla would have added its dependencies to that. But in this case, since we didn't have one, it just gave us a good default to start with.
Thanks.
I have a question here.
I promise this is my last question. I have noticed actually that you use the Flux. Does it mean that you use the reactor in your Spring Boot application? I mean,
The Spring Boot or Hilla itself doesn't use reactor, so when you return a Flux, it actually goes over a WebSocket. So it's not using like Netty or anything.
yeah, I mean, I just noticed that the Flux usually used in the Spring Web Flux. That's why I bit got confused.
Did you get cut off?
Yes, a bit seems like so. Yeah, a bit confused, but
Yeah. Yeah, so it's... What? Yeah.
I mean, so the main question, did you mix synchronous and asynchronous Java code using the reactor in the web Flux? I noticed that, I mean, in the case when you return the prompt,
Yeah.
yeah, here it is, yes. Yeah, exactly, that's reactor. It's
Yes.
basically async.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's, it's obviously like in the Spring ecosystem, if you have something that is kind of reactive, like in this case, we're calling something where we expect a stream of things coming our way. It's a pretty natural way of expressing that. So, all right, I think, did you have one question? No? Okay, so let's do one more and then we'll wrap up and
yeah, just to follow up on this, I think he's talking about like, do you use the MVC model or the servlet model or the Webflux model?
MVC.
Yeah, okay, I think that's what you were going for. Yeah.
I got confused. Usually when you use Flux, so you're supposed to write everything in Flux or Mono, but here you basically just regular MVC mixing with the Flux, and I got a bit confused about that.
Yeah, no, I can see how that is.
My actual question was about like the package JSON. So you have basically two places to control dependencies now. So you have to actually, for example, if you want to update Hilla, you have to like do it in the package JSON and in the POM, or is it
No,
like
so if you update your POM file, Hilla will take care of updating its own
okay.
dependencies
That's nice.
in there. Of course, if you have any, like in this case when we added React Markdown, because that's something you added yourself, you'd be. But anything that's like Hilla put there, it's gonna make sure it also updates.
Oh, thanks. Right.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap up here. If you asked a good question, you can come up and get a sticker. If you have questions after this, you can find me on the internet or down at the booth with the reindeer picture. Thank you so much for sticking around for a late session on this last day. Very much appreciate it. Thank you.